Okay, guys, I am very excited to welcome our next guest to Let's Get Freaky podcast. We got a fantastic Andrew Smith with us today. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
It's awesome to have you on. So, you are the curator at the Fleetwood Monster Museum in West Virginia.
Yeah, well, the Flatwoods Monster Museum.
Oh,
But yeah,
what did I just say?
it's okay.
I
All
had
that
what?
talk, all that talk before out the window.
Man, I had one job. Oh, jeez.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I apologize, man. What did I say? Did I not say
Fleetwood
Fleetwood? Oh
must,
man,
must have had Fleetwood Mac on the brain.
man, I must have done. I apologize for that. The
That's all right.
the Flatwoods Monster, the Flatwoods. I'll edit that.
No,
I won't. I won't. I won't. That's staying in. It all stays in.
great.
How are you, though, sir? You all good?
I'm great. I've got a bit of a sunburn on my neck from
Same.
today. I don't know how much you've looked into, sort of the stuff around here that has to do with the Flatwoods Monster, but we have these five Flatwoods Monster chairs that are spread all over our county. And at this point, they're all like 7 to 6 years old and in desperate need of a paint job. So I've been painting them today. That's why my fingernails are green and I have a burnt neck. But otherwise, I'm good. How
Awesome,
about
man.
yourself? How are you doing?
Well, the funny thing is, I've actually got burnt feet.
Okay.
So I've been on the beach. I was on the beach yesterday, and it's quite hot over in the UK at the moment. And every year, obviously I'm a ginger guy, so I have to put my suntan, my sun cream on. And
Yeah.
I've covered myself up, but I forgot to do my feet. So I've got burnt feet as we speak right now.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife, she's in the summer, she's always wearing, flip flops. So I always have to get on to her and get her feet for her. But today I even packed sunblock, but I didn't think to put it on until I was about 4 hours in and I knew the damage was already done. So I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah. Might as well just burn now, man.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
exactly.
feel you. Every year I burn my feet, and I say to myself, next year you're not going to burn your feet. But I've done it already. So there we go. There we go. So you obviously you have got a cool job. You work in a museum with cryptids. That is awesome, man.
Yes. Yes. It's very cool. It's very cool.
So I know of the Flatwood Monster. I said it right that time,
Yeah.
right?
Perfect. Perfect.
I know of obviously it's I've seen some cool art of it.
Yeah.
I know roughly the story around it, but can you explain to the listeners that may not know what the Flatwood Monster is?
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to. So, um, the Flatwoods Monster was a creature or something that was seen by eyewitnesses on September 12th, 1952, in the small town of Flatwoods, which is in Braxton County, the dead center of West Virginia. And so the witnesses, actually, I tell you what, I'll just start at the very beginning of the story and introduce the witnesses as I go. So um, it was about 7 o'clock or so. There were a bunch of kids playing in the lawn, or I guess at the lawn of the Flatwoods Elementary School in Flatwoods, West Virginia. And the way that I understand it, there was actually a bunch of kids, and this was pretty normal to have a bunch of kids just playing outside. I mean, it was the 50s. What else are they going to do? So, um, so there was maybe in the teens or 20s of kids playing, and while they were out there, they see this bright object streak across the sky and appear to land on a nearby hilltop that was about, maybe a quarter mile away, half mile away. Um, and So six of the kids there decided they would go and check it out. And so there were six boys, the youngest being 9 and the oldest being 15. And I'm going to try to remember all their names now right off the top of my head. This is the kind of stuff I should have written right in front of me. But I want to try to go from oldest to youngest. Hopefully I won't get this wrong. So there's Neil Nunley, um, Ed May, Freddie May. They were brothers. Um, Teddy Neal, and oh, shoot, the youngest is going to escape me. I can't remember. I can't remember the youngest. I'm sorry. If you
That's all
Google
right,
it,
man.
these, uh, these, uh, these, how many did I say? 5? I think there's
I think
6.
so. Fair play,
I
man,
think,
because I struggle with names, so
yeah.
that's you done well there.
Well, so anyway, so all these children run toward this hill where they see this object appear to land, and on their way up the hill, they actually are going to be passing the 2 May boys' home. So they run in and they know that their mom is home, Kathleen May. So they tell their mother, this thing, they just saw this thing fly through the sky. Come with us and check this out. So at this point, they really have no idea what it was, or what it might be even. Actually, I think they may have guessed that it might have been a meteor or something, but they weren't sure. So anyway, and they're still not sure, to be quite honest with you. So, so she decided she would join them, and she also got her cousin, who's Eugene Lemon. He was at a neighbor's house, the way that I understand it, and so this was a cousin of hers. Her maiden name was Lemon, and he was evidently an Army National Guardsman. So they figured, well, might probably bring him with us just in case, it's something that we might need a strapping young man for. So the eight witnesses go up this hill, and at this point it's getting fairly dark. So this is in the fall, and so it's not completely dark, but it's fairly dark. So they're walking up through these. They walk across this pasture field, and then start walking through the actual brush of the forest, and they're walking slow because it's dark under the canopy of the trees. But they notice at the top of the hill there's a pulsing red light that they assume is light coming from this object that they just saw come through the sky. So kind of as they're paying attention to that, they notice movement from their left coming from the woods. So they turn their one flashlight that they had toward it, and they see this towering, like 10 to 12 foot tall figure. And, that would later be described as the Flatwoods Monster. But this tall figure that appeared to be floating and moving through the woods. And as they noticed it noticed them. So it started coming toward them. And as you can imagine, they didn't stick around long after that. Turned, ran back down the hill, incredibly scared, not really knowing what it was they just saw. They just knew they just saw this tall creature or something in the woods that appeared to be moving intelligently. So they run home and lock the doors, and immediately call the local emergency number, which at that time it wouldn't have been 911. I don't know what the emergency number is like in the UK, but in America, think of 911, but yeah. I don't think that
it's 999 in the UK. 999.
Okay, that's good to know in case I'm ever there.
Yeah, man.
So at that time, the emergency numbers actually, it rang into our local county jail, and the person that would answer it would either be the county jailer or somebody from his family. They were the people that answered the phones. And actually his daughter, who was 12 at the time, is the one that answered the phone call. And I actually had an opportunity to interview her, and I put that whole interview up on our Flatwoods Monster Museum YouTube channel if anybody would like to check the whole thing out. It's pretty long, and we cover a lot of stuff, and it probably covers a lot of stuff that may even be boring, but that's there if somebody would want to check it out. Yeah. So anyway, so she got this call, and she knew Kathleen. She knew the May boys. So So she, she knew how hysterical she was on the phone. So as quick as she could, she got a hold of her dad, who then got a hold of the sheriff and his deputy, and they all go to the residence to check things out. So by the time they get there, it was completely dark. I mean, it's pitch black at this time. So they take their story, they talk to them, see what they could say. I don't know if they actually even did take down like an official statement, like on paper. To be honest with you, I don't even know if that's something that they did back then. The only thing I do know is that doesn't exist today, unfortunately. So anyway, they go up on the hill, and they have their flashlights, and they don't really find anything. However, the one thing that they do notice is, and I forgot to mention this earlier, when this thing came toward them, it emitted this smell. In some writings, it talks about it being like a fog, but in some, it doesn't really talk about how much it looked, but just the smell. And so this bad smell filled the air that they described as being like a burnt metal smell, which I would always equate it to like welding, the smell that you smell somebody's welding. I don't know if that's exactly what it was, but it's something in that ballpark. So they could still smell that a little bit. That was still hanging in the air. But otherwise, this mysterious figure in the woods was gone, and the light at the top of the hill was gone. So, however, there, and I don't, this is only what I've been told. I actually haven't been able to find the actual recording of this, but surely it must have been recorded or printed somewhere for it to be any amount of knowledge. But the way I understand it is that a resident that lived on so like if this is the hill where the sighting took place, like, and then a valley on an adjoining hill, that there was a neighbor who said early the next morning he saw something leave the hill.
Wow.
Again, I've never been able to confirm that, but I've been told that by several people, and evidently that used to be a thing. Like, it's kind of like local information.
Yeah.
Like old people in this area have told me that, but like I said, I've never been able to find that written. But anyway, what makes the Flatwoods Monster story so important, really, is that it was one of the first, if not the first, at least supposedly or possible UFO encounter or alien encounter that actually was able to build enough steam to get, it got international coverage just within, a few days of the sighting taking place. So nothing like at Roswell, where the story was recanted a couple days later, and then the newspaper ran like a redaction. So nothing like that happened with Flatwood. So it was able to get off the ground and really become famous. Now, it was famous quick and for a short period of time, but it was kind of the first one to make a big splash. And it was one of the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigations. It was kind of one of the first ones to really spearhead those investigations to try to get to the bottom of what this UFO phenomenon was. And there's a lot of debate whether or not Project Blue Book actually had any intention on getting to the bottom of things, or if it was just trying to give a good explanation that could explain it. Because I think the U.S. government in general was learning pretty quickly that trying to cover up stories was causing more harm than good. And whether what they were covering up or not was happening, I don't know. So I think that what they were trying to do is they knew that, at least the U.S. population had concerns about UFOs, and they wanted to try to at least show an honest, good faith investigation of it. And like I said, the Flatwoods Monster, I don't know if it was it probably wasn't the first thing that Project Blue Book looked into, but it was very early.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. So that's basically the main story of the Flatwoods Monster. And really, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to necessarily say that's where Flatwoods Monster like encounters begin and end, but for me, it kind of is where it is. But there are a couple of like surrounding stories that whether by description or geography, people tend to put in with the Flatwoods Monster. I don't know if either one, they're valid enough to really consider, or two, if they actually relate enough details at all to consider them to be related.
Yeah.
But fascinating. If you're interested in those, I can try to do my best to tell you about those as well. But
Yeah,
the
man.
September 12th case is the primary Flatwoods Monster case.
Awesome, man. Interesting. So how many people overall saw it that night?
8.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'm not getting my numbers wrong, I'm almost positive 8. But since I can't really in my mind put a name and a face with every one of those people, I can at least say for sure 7.
Okay.
So 2 adults and the rest children. And Kathleen May was the primary. So she was 32 at the time. So she was sort of the primary witness as far as the media was concerned, and as far as like investigators at the time. She was who was talked to the most. But I don't know if you're familiar with them. You probably are. The paranormal investigator Ivan T. Sanderson came into the area and also interviewed some of the kids independently as well.
Yeah.
And this he also worked closely with Braxton County native, who you might also have heard of before, Gray Barker. And Gray Barker, the Flatwoods Monster, was kind of the first story that he got to work with so personally and got to be so involved in. That kind of put him on the map. So like between John Keel, Ivan T. Sanderson, and Gray Barker, they were kind of like some of the bigger, paranormal or UFO. I don't know what you would have called them at the time, but strange things investigators
Yeah.
as well. So that kind of put him on the map as well.
Interesting, man. Because anyone that's seen, most of us have seen a picture of this creature. It is a freaky looking thing. I mean, it doesn't really look like anything else that's
No.
out there.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that can almost either lend to either the validity of the story, or maybe even the invalidity of the story, because how can something that's real have really only been encountered one time? But then in the same hand, you could say, well, if something is weird and maybe shouldn't be on Earth, maybe you should have only seen it once.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
who knows? But yeah, so if your listeners don't know the way it was described, I want to try to get all the actual details that I know witnesses have said, and then maybe expound on maybe how it was represented in the media at the time, because I think there are some discrepancies. But at this point, we're so far removed from when the sighting happened. At this point, you kind of just have to pick your favorite version of something and run with it. It's hard to know where truth actually lies. But in any case, so they described it, like I said, as being between 10 and 12 feet tall. And the reason why they guessed that is because it was, when they first noticed it, it was standing by this really tall and big oak tree. And it had a really tall trunk on it, and like no limbs up to about 12 feet. And that the monster stood just under that. So that's where they get the 10 to 12 feet from. It was described as having a large, big, round face, or like face area, with this large sort of pointed spade shape behind the head. The I don't know if I said this or not, but the face was described as red with 2 large circles on it that you could either describe as eyes, or some witnesses later on would try to really clarify their statement. And like I know Freddie in particular, he said the way that he remembers it best is it didn't look like that they were eyes, but like almost like windows where you could see something into it. It's like there was a light.
Oh, wow.
So he didn't know if it was like lights on the front, or if it was just something glowing to where you could see light inside of it.
Interesting.
It had this tall, thin body that some witnesses would describe as colorless. Some would describe it as green. And I think both of those could come from where, some investigators and some witnesses later on would describe the body as being like metallic. So if it was shiny, I could see where you could describe it, depending on how you look at it, as both colorless or green, because if it's reflecting what's around you and you're in the woods, there's a lot of green. Or if you're like looking at a mirror, does a mirror have color? Not really. So, excuse me, sorry about that.
That's okay, no problem.
Hopefully that doesn't blow your listeners' ears out.
Not at all, man. So is there a possibility that this creature could have been some sort of like the actual creature could have been like a craft itself?
That some people theorize that actually that it was something mechanical, and that it was either not necessarily piloted, but like operating somehow mechanically, whether remotely or with a program or something like that, or that there was something inside of it, piloting it. And I don't, I will tell you, and I don't know, I would have to think that everybody would have to have their preferred version of something. And maybe even almost regardless if that's true, just because we like what we like and that sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, even though this is a real story that really happened, in the little area where I'm from, we still, if you're a fan of this stuff, you can look at it from two ways. You can either look at it from like a researcher point of view, or from like a fan point of view. And I'm kind of a fan more than anything. So it's kind of like, what's your favorite version of Michael Myers? You know what I mean? So like for me, it's like the drawing, actually, I don't know, you there's a poster back here of it, but anyway, like the one that was used when Kathleen May sat down with the police, with a sometimes people say a police sketch artist, but I actually don't think it was a police sketch artist. I think it was just an artist that worked for a TV network at the time, and sat down with her and used her description to draw this picture, because she appeared on a television show around the time when the sighting took place to talk about her story. And so this was really early in television. So the way that I understand it is the TV show was simulcast as a television show and a radio show. So for the television audience, so they had some sort of visual, is the reason why it was drawn. So, but so going back to like what it looked like, that's the version I like the most. Yeah. But it's because I will tell you, it's not because necessarily I think it's the realest version. I just like it. I think it's cool. Yeah. So a lot of different critics, and not necessarily critics, investigators have, not liked that description. Like I think that they think a lot of the artist is in that drawing and not necessarily her description. Okay. But like, to be fair with is, I'm an artist myself. I've been an artist since I was 3 years old. And one thing that I could imagine could have what could have ended up with the final product we have today could have also come with, if you're taking somebody's testimony and trying to draw something based on their testimony, if they don't fill in every single gap that you need to make an image, you have to fill it in. Yeah. So how much of that drawing is fill in and how much of it is direct. The only thing that I know is Kathleen May, on multiple occasions, was willing to literally stand beside this drawing and hold it up. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, however, I will say, at least on 2 different accounts, she was interviewed by people and said that the arms that you see in this image weren't accurate and that it didn't have arms. So, so you kind of take that, with what you will.
Yeah.
And even when she said that, she didn't have anything to gain over it at the time. It was just people that was interested and wanted to talk to her. So like, for example, just as a general blanket statement. So Kathleen, while she was alive, now she passed away in 2009. And then subsequently, as she got older, and then after she passed away, her son, Freddie May, was interviewed. So between the two of them, they were interviewed the most. Excuse me. But they were interviewed, because people were interested. They never once seeked out. I mean, they never seeked out attention in the beginning. Really, the reason why they got any attention at all, the way that I understand it, is the man who owned the local newspaper happened to know Kathleen fairly well and was friends with her. As a matter of fact, Kathleen May was very well known and liked in the community. She was a hairdresser. I mean,
Okay.
everybody. I mean, she was and she was very active in a lot of like civic stuff and like philanthropy. So she was very well known and well liked.
Yeah.
But anyway, she knew the newspaper owner, and the newspaper owner, I'm sure, thought, well, this is a great story. I'm gonna see if I can interview her. And since they were friends, she didn't really have a reason not to. So he wrote the first story that was printed in the local newspaper, and then subsequently it was printed in a statewide newspaper. And then that story was then hit the AP and was printed all over the place, all over America. And then pretty soon translated into many different languages and printed all over the country.
Wow.
I'm sorry, all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So are all any of the children that saw this creature, are they still alive, or is there?
Yeah. So the 2 May boys, I say May boys, Freddie just turned, believe Freddie is 82 and his brother would be 84. But they both still live in West Virginia. They're both, Freddie has had his health issues, but he's still with us. I will say though, sadly, his wife just passed away like a week ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, I am too. They were actually our neighbors.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was very sad news for us. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention her. She, I'll mention her by name too. She went by Piddle. That was her nickname. That's what everybody knew her by. But she was a great lady. But anyway, so you asked if they were still alive. So Freddie and Ed are still alive. I don't know about anybody else though, because everybody else has moved. Pretty soon after they reached adulthood, most of them moved out of the area. So it's at least nobody that I've ever known has kept up with them. So like, for example, I know a gentleman really well named John Gibson. He would have to be 85 or so. He just had a birthday the other day, according to Facebook. So
happy birthday, man, if you're listening.
I'll send him.
Yeah.
So John went to school with one of the witnesses, Neil Nunley, and they were like best friends. But he wasn't able to keep up. Like, he doesn't know where Neil is today or anything like that. But actually, John Gibson is probably one of the reasons why the Flatwoods Monster story is still sort of known today, because like I said, he knew Neil really well. So Neil told him everything that happened, like literally like the next day at school, to the point where he took John, up into the woods, pointed, like, oh, over there, over here, told him the story. And then John has subsequently told that story innumerable times, and he's been a constant in this area. He's lived in this area his entire life. And he's told me, everything that I know comes from him. And I was actually, actually, I was just going to say something that may incriminate myself, so I'm not going to. So never mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, we better. We better not.
Yeah.
We don't need any lawsuits.
No.
You can tell me after we finish recording, if you don't mind.
Okay. No, not at all.
I need to know.
Okay.
So you obviously these guys quite well. That's cool, man.
Yeah. I've known Freddie now. Oh, I'd say at least 7 years or so. And like I said, him and his wife were our neighbors for a while. And we would talk about the Flatwoods Monster every so often. Not a lot, because, this is something that happened to him a long time ago. And really, in the grand scheme of things, it was one day, out of his whole long life.
Yeah.
And there's probably a part of him that was sick of talking about it.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, is he
Yeah.
is he sick of it or?
Yeah. But I also think I think that he does appreciate the fact that if it weren't for this really traumatic thing that him and his family went through, he knows that. I think he feels like it was worth it, because now the place where he's from that he loves was like put on the map. And so, like, it's because of him and it's because of his family. So I think he's really proud of that aspect of it. But like I said, I think he couldn't care less to talk about it, but he would probably love that I'm talking about it with you.
That's cool, man.
And another thing that he always liked too is, so as a part of my job here and running the Flatwoods Monster Museum is, I told you I've been an artist my whole life. One of my favorite things to do is design new Flatwoods Monster souvenirs and stuff. So, we sell t-shirts and stuff like that. And pretty much anytime I get anything new in, it was always been my habit to take him one, at least take him one. And he always loved that. Like if a new shirt came out or something and he got one. Here's the funny thing, though. I don't think he ever wore one shirt that I brought him. Like, he such a cool, like, I think he was afraid he would mess it up. Like, I've literally been over to his house and seen like a shirt folded up laying that I gave him like 2 years prior, and it's setting, like he's got it setting on a shelf.
Yeah.
So I think he's proud of it in that regard. But like any given day, he was always much more interested in, talking about like our lawns or our pets or the weather or, him and his wife really loved my daughter. She would go over there all the time. So we talk about Maddie a lot. That's what he would rather, talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I know him pretty well, but that's
so
it.
Cool, man.
Yeah, that's my only connection. I never got to meet Kathleen May, and I always feel bad. I feel regret because, she lived to be in her 90s, and she passed away, I believe, in 2009. And, I could have met her, but I never did.
Yeah. That's cool though, that you've met Freddie and you've got that great connection with him. And, obviously you know him, so obviously the story that happened. But that validation you must have, because you know him, you talk about it all the time, and that's really cool, man.
Yeah. That's one thing I'll say is, in the time that I've known him, if he wanted to, he would have had any opportunity ever. And he would know that I would have kept it in confidence. At any point, he could have told me, like, "Hey, Andrew, I got to tell you something. We made this whole thing up." And he never has.
Yeah.
So that to me speaks a lot of volumes as well.
Yeah, man. When the image came out that we all know um, of the monster,
Yeah.
how quickly did the drawings come out? Was it on that TV show that they was on when it first came out, or was it
Yeah.
something that was
Yeah.
in the paper?
So, right. Yeah. So I don't know the exact timeline on that, but it was pretty quick. I mean, not as quick as it would be today, but you know, it was pretty quick. It was printed in the paper um, pretty quickly, like I said, and pretty much it accompanied the picture of Kathleen May holding it, accompanied pretty much every reprinting of that article. Um, so pretty much that drawing is almost synonymous with the story because it got shared at the same time as the
Yeah.
information. And I'll tell you something really interesting that I learned within the last couple years is I don't know if you're aware or not, but evidently the Flatwoods Monster is really big in Japan.
Okay.
But I learned why just a couple years back. So I think it was during our first year while we were open or the second. So it was either 2018 or 2019. A lady came to visit who was originally from Japan, but had lived in America, I believe at the time, for like 15 years. And she came to visit. So we got to talking, and so in Japan, she was into, and I can't remember the exact words that she used, but basically, like, she was into like nerd Japanese culture. So, so the Flatwoods Monster, she said, was always really prevalent. She said, but she knew the image of the Flatwoods Monster, but did not know the story. She said she didn't even know that it came from a real account until she found our information and started looking into it. So probably from our website. So so anyway, what had happened was, I think I got the year right, but sometime in the 50s, I want to say 1959, but I know whatever it was in the 50s. There was a UFO book that was published in Japan that was pretty popular. And in that book, I wish that I had a version in front of me that I could show you. But if people Google the Flatwoods Monster and find an old picture of what looks like the drawing of the Flatwoods Monster, but superimposed into like a picture of the woods, that was made by Gray Barker, not to try to dupe anybody, but to try to illustrate what the Flatwood Monster would have looked like within the context of the woods, essentially. Yeah. Well, this was printed in Japan in a book, and I don't know if there was like a loss in translation or something, but evidently most of the readers of that book took that photo at face value and thought that what they were seeing was a picture of an alien. So not like a depiction, because it's actually, for the time, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good photo. Yeah. And it's like it's just grainy enough and low quality enough that you could think, well, if you sharpen that up, that's real. So anyway, so it made a huge impact, because the readers of this book thought, holy crap, this is a picture of an alien. So anyway, it made such a big impact and ingrained itself into so many people there that the look of it, like the art of it, became used and popular and adapted in like a bunch of different ways, you know, in books and in comics and cartoons and toys, stuff like that. Like in Japan, you can find like you know, like those shoot, I don't even know what like those, they're not vending machines, but like, you know, those, like you put a couple coins in, you turn it, and a little toy pops out in a little egg, right?
Yeah.
You can buy little miniature Flatwoods Monsters in machines like that in Japan.
Wow.
And in relation to nothing, like that's just how much they just love the way that it looks.
Yeah.
So I've always found that incredibly fascinating, that somehow like the design of the Flatwoods Monster has overshadowed the story of the Flatwoods Monster in Japan, to the point where, now this might have changed in recent years, but they would always refer to the Flatwoods Monster in Japan as 3 meter tall alien.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. But
Yeah.
that stuff. And I'll be honest with you too, when this has been your job for 5 years, the overall, like the story that I told you at the beginning of this episode, it's interesting. I mean, it's still very much an interesting story to me, and it still captivates my imagination. But at a certain time, or at a certain point, you can only sort of hear the same story and have it make an impact. What's funny is I noticed that it makes an impact when I tell somebody for the first time, like I did you, and then that sort of brings it back to me how, for lack of a
Amazing.
better, like value, yes, amazing the story is, because it can get a little humdrum, you know what I mean? But I really get into the sort of the weird little minutia of the story, and especially culturally, like the cultural impact and stuff like that. So that's what really gets my gears turning. But yeah, the importance and the impact of the story itself really can't be overstated. I mean, it is amazing, and to the point where it made a really big effect on the area. Like I've been told that, like, by the next day, like for instance, my my wife's grandmother, she's lived in this area her whole life. And I believe when that took place, I think she told me she was 13 or 14. She was up on that property the next day,
Oh, wow.
along with the way she describes it as like half of Braxton County.
Wow.
Like that's
Yeah.
how quick the story spread, and people wanted to go check. And it may have been mostly kids, because she would have been a kid at the time. But yeah, she was up there, and she doesn't even think anything of it, which blows my mind. But so she's in her 80s now. But then shoot, I was going to go somewhere else with that. Oh, but the Mays themselves, the May family. Freddie told me, this is something I never knew until Freddie told me. He said, for like the next month after that sighting took place, if it was dark out, his family was not outside. They
Yeah.
were in, because they were genuinely worried that whatever it was they saw was going to come back. So even though they didn't know what it was, even though they didn't know where it came from, they were genuinely petrified. And these were people that spent, like, especially the kids, spent all their time in the woods, playing, playing hide and go seek, hunting, from a pretty young age, and kind of by themselves.
Yeah.
And for it to have that impact, I mean, they just said they were just petrified. If it was like basically 5 o'clock, everybody's coming inside and we're locking the door, and we're not going
Yeah.
outside. Yeah.
That shows you how terrifying it must have been to
Yeah.
experience that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, man. And that's so cool that it's brought the whole town together as well. Obviously, everyone went out the next day, and it must have
Yeah.
been such an exciting time. But obviously, because they haven't got the
Yeah.
knowledge we've got now. But yeah,
Right. Yeah. And what was funny though is, this is something that, now I don't know when this would have started, but talking to people in the area, like over the last 20 years or so, everybody in the area either falls into one of two camps, and that's either whatever they said they saw it. To the point where, the lady I told you about that was young, that answered that phone call in that interview. I asked her, I said, what do you think it was that they saw? And almost everybody gives the same non-committal answer, the same one that I give. And but she said, I said, what do you think that was that they saw? And she said, an alien. And I was like, kind of taken aback. I said, really? Why do you think that? And he said, because the way they described it. I don't, what else could it be? And she said, and I saw my dad when he came home that night. Said he said it, she said it made an impact on him. And
Yeah.
I said he was a grown man. She said that I thought was the biggest, strongest man in the world. He was the guy that was in charge of a jail, and he was scared. So she was like, if my dad comes back from this scared, they saw something, and it was worth being afraid of. So,
Yeah.
that's impactful for me too.
Yeah, man. And it's so interesting that someone saw it or saw something possibly fly off. Because I've not
Yeah.
heard that. That's really cool as well.
Yeah. But like I said, I have no idea if that's ever even been printed anywhere. I've just always heard it. Because when you grow up in an area that has a local legend, you just hear things. And all honesty, maybe I should even take that with a grain of salt. But that is something that I've been told.
Is there any other little uh, talking points that you might only know if you're from the area that you can share or that might not be as known?
Right. You know what? Off the top of my head, there's nothing else like that I can think of. But I'll tell you what's actually kind of interesting, but it's in the opposite direction. So the folks that have lived here, but like maybe didn't grow up during that time, but maybe were born like maybe they were babies at the time, so they didn't actually live it, or they were born later. Um, there seems to be a lot. You hear a lot of stuff. Um, I don't know if folks genuinely believe it, but you'll hear things um, that I don't know where they're getting it from. But you'll basically, if someone lives in the area and they know about the Flatwoods Monster, but they've not cared enough to ever look into it themselves at all, which is probably a lot of people. I mean, it's probably a lot of people that live here that they fall into that camp. So whatever they know about it is what somebody told them, and the likelihood that whatever they told them was not true, or was only partial. Like the thing that I've heard, especially growing up, that I heard a lot was like, oh, those people, they must have been drinking moonshine to see that. But what's funny is like in hindsight, that tells me like that they don't even realize we're talking about genuine kids, like
Yeah.
like 9, 11, 13. I mean, maybe the 15-year-old, maybe, but otherwise. And then they're also not getting their mom. They're not getting their mom involved if
No,
you drink.
no.
So that's actually something that I've always found kind of surprising, is that until my organization kind of started making a bigger deal about the Flatwoods Monster, the local interest had been really passive, and actually like not that involved. Like it's been not the interest, the main interest has always come from outside the area, from folks like you, either in other states or other countries.
Yeah.
That's where the main interest comes. The local interest was not incredibly high. I think, like I said, until we started doing, my organization really started leaning hard into the Flatwoods Monster as a topic of interest, probably in like 2014. Because this is something that I was kind of telling you about before we started recording. I work for the Braxton County Convention and Visitors Bureau. So what that entails is basically it's an organization whose purpose it is to try to, in some way or another, positively affect tourism
Yeah.
in the area. So what I would see when at the old location of my office is I actually wouldn't get a whole lot of visitors who would come in. But when I did, it was people that were interested in the Flatwoods Monster. And they were like, what can we do that has to do with the Flatwoods Monster? So I would come to my board meetings and be like, I'm getting a lot of interest in the Flatwoods Monster. Maybe we should try to, lean into that a little harder, because obviously, people are really interested. And, I think people would would respond well. I think people would like it. And luckily I had a good board of directors that sort of were like, okay, you know, whatever you think. And so the more we did, the more interest there was. And the more people, so getting all the way back around to what I was just talking about with locals, is the more people that come from outside the area into our local area because of their interest in the Flatwoods Monster, the more that locals now see it as a thing that they can be proud of.
Yeah.
You know, as a thing that they can see as a positive, and to where now the actual local interest has increased as a result of visitor interest, which is weird. You would think it would be the other way around, but it's not really. Other than a couple very dedicated, like locals who are interested in the story and interested in keeping it alive, that was pretty much it. There really wasn't local interest.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are doing a good job, because I know over here and all over the world, obviously there is a lot of interest, because it is a cryptid that comes up a lot. When
Yeah.
you see when you look at the scale of all the cryptids, that's one of the main ones. It definitely
Yeah.
is, because you see it a lot. So you're doing a good job, man.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, and what I'd like to say too is, you know, I realize that I work for an organization whose job it is to bring tourists. So I think it could be real easy for someone to say like, well, yeah, you're blowing this up because you want people to come there. But in all actuality and genuinely, the Flatwoods Monster does all the heavy lifting for us. We just have to like tell people like, hey, did you guys know there's a Flatwoods Monster? And then they're like, what? You know, so like, for instance, my organization, we print like several printed pieces that promote the area. So like, and we distribute them and things like that without fail all the time. The piece that we run out of is the Flatwoods Monster piece. And literally it's just, actually I can show it to you. I mean, it's this.
That's cool, man.
So it says Flatwoods Monster with a picture of it.
Yeah.
That's all you need. Like we didn't make this up to trick people. We pulled this from the past, you know, like that's a thing that existed. We just decided to talk about it, and you know, it works and brings people into the area. So, you know, why not use it if you're, especially, you know, if somebody lives in an area where, you know, maybe they could use the economic impact. You know, so far I've not seen a downside. Like I said, the one witness that I know, Freddie, he is always sort of, you know, he's always been proud. He's only visited here once. Like I said, he seemed proud. And we make new. The part that I thought he would actually not like the most is like making merch and stuff, because like I said, I approach this more as a fan. So like, I don't take a lot of things real seriously. And I know that you do, and like a lot of the people you've had on your show. I mean, I listened to a few podcasts before I came on, and
Thank you, man.
You have people that are really dedicating their lives to this sort of stuff, and almost sort of betting, you know, they're kind of betting the house on it, which I respect. I mean, I respect that. I respect the heck out of that. But if I'm being honest, I'm not in that camp. But I will say, I mean, I enjoy this stuff. But like I said, it's kind of from the same point of view as people that like horror movies. I mean, that's where I fall into. But I've been into this stuff, I mean, ever since I was a kid. And actually, before I even knew that there was a Flatwoods Monster, like for instance, my favorite cryptid growing up was always air rods. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
What is that? I must have seen it, but I'm not sure.
You probably have. I will say, it's disappointing to me that you know how like they've always had all these TV shows, you know, about the strange and the mysterious.
Yeah.
You know, for decades now, and I watched those religiously growing up.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And, there was one in particular that I really liked. That was Monster Quest.
Yeah.
The freaking Air Rods episode is the only one where they actually successfully debunked it.
No. No, man.
I was so disappointed. So if you look into it, some people just call them rods. I think also some people might call them skyfish, or that could be two different. I might be mixing things up, but in any case, an air rod was a thing that really only started being seen in the 90s, but it wasn't seen in person. It was seen when people would be like recording,
Okay.
like with, I think mostly like VHS recorders, like handheld recorders, when they're like recording outside and they see them after the fact. So what it is you'll see, like, say if the screen that you can see me on is the screen, right? You'll see a thing like start come through one side of the frame and go out the other, and it'll look like a long, thin, like a line or a rod with
Yeah.
these like undulating things. It almost looks like it has wings that come down its whole body.
Okay.
And in the they're usually only are in the they're usually only in the frame, a fraction of a second. They're in there really, so you have to like slow them down to really see them. So there were these things that they assumed, they're like, shoot, there are just these things that are flying around us all the time that are moving so fast we don't see them. So like I was hooked by air rods. Like when I was like 10, I was hooked. So anyway, this show comes
Do
on.
they light up? Are they lit up or?
Well, here's what's funny. Some of them maybe. So because the phenomenon that they blame it on is whenever people are recording, I think specifically on like VHS magnetic tape, that in order to keep the footage smooth, that the frames like interlace. Like rather than being like a picture, it's like this. So
Okay.
what they think happened, and they were able to reproduce the results. So that's what tells me it's pretty well debunked. Is what they were capturing was like things like bugs or birds, and that rather than seeing like one bird like in one point, you actually see it like this, and then it blurs together.
And it creates the line.
Yes. So like the body
Ah.
or the bird creates the line, and its wings create the undulation. So that like I'm dead serious. Whenever I was a kid, rods were my thing, and I
Yeah.
would talk about them to everybody, and nobody ever knew what I was talking about. And I was like, they were one. I think the first time I heard about them was on Unsolved Mysteries.
Okay.
Unsolved Mysteries. So,
Yeah.
and then in that show, they were real. I mean, they were real. So then when they did this Monster Quest episode, but like that's the only place they were that I ever saw. But I loved them. It made a huge impact on me. I had to talk about them to everybody, and nobody knew what I was talking about. And I didn't know the word cryptid at the time. I was like, they're like long bugs. They're crazy looking. So anyway, that show came on, and what they did was they set up two cameras side by side, and they're pointing them at this bush at night. So these bright lights pointing at this bush, and these two cameras. One was like a really high quality HD slow motion camera, and one was like a 90s era handy cam. And they're both shooting and recording at the same time. Then a guy goes out and shakes the bush. And then all of a sudden in the slow-mo, you see these moths and stuff flying around. And they're clearly moths in the high definition picture. And
Yeah.
over here on the one, you see rods all over the place.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah. So
man.
I was so disappointed. Like immediately, like come down and tell my mom, like these shows never prove anything. They never prove anything. And they have to prove
The one you love the most.
the one thing I love the most.
Oh man. That's probably why I've never heard of the rods, because they've they proved it.
Yeah.
Ah.
It's cool though, and it's interesting. And there are some people who still say that no, that's not an adequate enough,
Yeah.
so there, and that there are rods.
Yeah.
And maybe there are, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
they could have just created something that looked like the rods, but the rods could still be out there, man.
Sure.
I'll give up on them.
compelling. It was very compelling, but yeah, that's so the rod. But like I said, so I've been into this sort of stuff for a long time. And a funny thing about learning, so how I learned about the Flatwoods Monster was, so I moved, so I'm just from like literally an hour's drive away from here. You know, I'm not from very far away.
Okay.
But but I moved to this area when I was in the 6th grade, and I graduated from high school in 2003. Um, so let's say sometime in the 90s is when I moved here. So not so like before everybody had the internet, basically. And but I'd never heard of the Flatwoods Monster till I moved here. And then in like 6th grade, you know, as you would meet people, you know, meet new friends and that sort of thing, I would talk to people. And on several occasions, like literally my 6th grade year, kids that I went to school with would say out loud, Flatwoods Monster. And I was so puzzled, like, what are you talking about? So like I would stop and they would tell me, roughly like, oh, a long time ago, you know, people saw a monster. It's called the Flatwoods Monster. But then they would just move on. Like it was no big deal because they've lived with it their whole life.
Yeah.
So to them, anything, but I just remember being so struck with how, how pedestrian these kids thought of this monster that took place like miles from where they live. And that like, they didn't hardly think anything of it, but it's just so ingrained. So it's so ingrained in the fabric of the local consciousness, yet it hasn't made an impact on an individual level for most people to actually make them look into it or like read anything about it. It's probably like that thing where like maybe they heard it young enough that they just took it for granted.
Yeah.
Kind of like those things. If you learned a song when you were a kid and you got all the lyrics wrong, but then as an adult you still sing it wrong, even though you can look it up and, you know, like you're saying nonsense words.
Yeah.
But since that's how you learned it, that's what the song is. So
yeah.
I mean, I don't really know. But that struck me like in 6th grade. And I just thought it was so, and what was funny is I guess I must have been in the same boat because so I learned about it whenever I was in 6th grade. I probably didn't have a really good handle on the Flatwoods Monster story till maybe 7 years ago.
Okay.
So like when I was in my late 20s or 30 is when I learned really what the Flatwoods Monster was. And what the story and the people, like the people behind it. So, you know, so like I said, when I said I could have met Kathleen May, I could have, but like I didn't know her name till after she had passed away.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Well, you definitely you know your stuff, man. It's super interesting stuff.
I'm glad you like it.
So the spot where this took place,
Yeah.
is there signs there that sort of say this is where it happened, or is there anything like that?
No, I really wish that there were, at least to a certain degree. I
Yeah.
will say that that the site where it took place, I mean, at the time when it happened, it was on private property. But of course, at that time, it kind of wouldn't have been a big deal because everybody would have known everybody. It was a tiny community. But it's and still the site where it took place is private property. Unfortunately, the folks that own it don't, they have no interest in the Flatwoods Monster. They don't care about the Flatwoods Monster at all. And they will run off anybody who dares to
really
go. And what's bad is, the knowledge as to where it took place is very easy to find. I mean, as a matter of fact, we kind of try to go out of our way to not bring it up in particular, unless like in the very next breath we are also saying this is private property. We are not encouraging you to go trespass.
Okay.
Even to the point where the road that leads up to the property is privately owned and maintained, so it's not a public
Wow.
road.
Oh
So
man.
the unfortunate thing is, it's completely off limits. And I hope that in the future that can change. I've been trying to work with a property owner that they're not sure, and I haven't been able to go out in person and help them to verify. But there is somebody that I know who owns property that they believe is adjacent to the property where the sighting took place, and that
Okay.
they think that from their property you can see where it took place. So they have shown interest in, possibly developing something that is publicly accessible. But it's literally not gotten any further than just talking about the possibility of it. So I don't have any sort of end date in mind for that to be a project that's, that people can come check out. But I
Yeah.
do hope for that in the future.
Yeah, man. God, man, if I had that house, I'd let everyone come in and see it, and I'd have a big statue of it in there, you know?
Yeah. Well,
Ah,
the thing that I've always thought that I would do if I had the property is try to figure out a way to make some sort of publicly accessible path. Like, let's say you don't want them all over your property. That's fine. They're only
yeah,
really interested in like where the witnesses were standing,
yeah,
which is pretty small. Is try to figure out a way to make some sort of path that's like, this is publicly accessible. Going outside of this path or jumping this fence or whatever would be considered trespassing. But like, come and go as you please. And then at the bottom, I would have a lockbox where people could make donations.
yeah, 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 no,
And
for
then
sure.
I would rake in money that I did not have to work for.
Yeah, yeah. Because
But
you could have events there and all sorts, couldn't you, really?
yeah, unfortunately, that's where it stands now. So
Okay. So you've
yeah,
never actually been to the location that it took place?
um,
Or can you not
I,
say? Maybe.
I I plead the fifth as the testimony may tend
Yeah.
to incriminate.
Enough said. Enough said. So you said obviously that it only happened the one night,
Right.
but has there ever been any other reports of anything similar that looks similar to the creature, or
Yeah.
has anyone ever seen anything else separate to that night in the same place? Has there been any
Right.
other accounts anywhere?
Okay. So I know of three. Um, Two are fairly well documented to where you can look them up pretty easily. One was one that was just told to me personally by the lady who said she witnessed it. Um, our encounter was very brief, and like an idiot, I didn't think to like ask her name or her phone number to try to follow up. But there's three. So I'll start with sort of the most notable and sort of go to the least notable, which is the one that the lady told me. And I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever told it anywhere
Oh
else.
wow, we've got an exclusive here.
You might have an exclusive,
Yes.
unless I forgot. My brain is not what it used to be. Um, I'll be. It never was great. It never
I'm,
was
I'm
great.
with you, brother. Don't worry about
So anyway, um,
that.
so so the one that's sort of the most notable, other than the September 12th sighting, this sighting supposedly happened on September 13th, the very next night, and supposedly took place roughly like 10 to 20 miles away. But one of the things that for me puts a strike against it is it wasn't reported in public knowledge until 3 years later. It was only ever published one time, and it was in a magazine that I would say the majority of the stories in them, like the majority of the stories in them, are fiction. And then they also tell a lot of fantastic stories that are supposedly supposed to be real, that in all likelihood they're not real either. They're just meant to really entertain people that read them.
Yeah.
But it is kind of weird though that they get a lot of stuff right. So the person that would have, if it was made up, they would have had to do a fair amount of research, especially for the 1950s. They would have had to read some articles and know some things, or maybe just a good writer. I don't know. Then this is the story of George and Edith Snatowski. Their story goes that they were traveling from Cleveland, Ohio, to New York City. According to their story, they were visiting friends or family in Ohio and were traveling back. I will say the first time that I ever heard that, I thought, surely their route should never take them anywhere close to here. But the funny thing is, I put it into Google Earth or Google Maps, and I just put in, what I say, Cincinnati, Ohio? Yeah, I put in Cincinnati, Ohio, in New York City. The most direct route that is not an interstate, because this would have been pre-interstate, it actually takes you, you're the most direct route, it takes you through West Virginia, like literally 50 miles north. So it's plausible. It's plausible that they could have to this area. But that being said, I still don't believe them. So anyway, so the story goes that they were driving, and they were driving Route 4, which is the road, and they were driving Route 4 between, they said, the city of Clay and the city of Sutton. Now that's another problem, because if you're looking at a map, you might see Clay and you might see Sutton and probably nothing else. So therefore, that on a map it'll look small, but in reality, that's a gap of like at least 40 miles. So that's not precise. That is not a precise window.
Yeah.
And they describe the area they're driving through, and they describe it as wooded, which it is. But the problem too is Route 4, if you would ever to drive Route 4, the whole way going the direction they were going, you would have the Elk River to your right, and basically just a like straight hill, like straight uphill to your left. So yeah, it's wooded, but if you're driving and you look out to your left, you're not going to see woods. You're going to see like a hill that goes straight up. Like you're going to have road, side of the road, hill. And that's it. So that's another strike. So at no point in the description do they talk about all the hills. And at no point do they talk about this river that they would have been driving beside for at least 3 hours. They were driving beside this river.
Yeah.
So they didn't mention it. That's pretty weird. So anyway, they describe driving in this window, and experiencing their car shut off. So they pull off the road, and while George gets out to check on the car, he notices, I believe it was that he notices a light in the woods. So he walks toward the woods, and as he walks toward the woods, he noticed this figure sort of coming from the light. And if you were to Google Frametown Monster, or maybe Flatwoods Monster, but Frametown Monster is even more specific. There's an illustration that was done based off his testimony, and that is labeled Frametown Monster.
Okay.
Because the illustrator thought it was in Frametown, which is a small community in that section. So anyway, so he sees this thing, and he like starts walking toward it. Why you would, who knows? But he said as he gets closer to this light, he felt like he was being like, felt tingly, I think he said, like almost like he felt electricity, not like being electrocuted,
Yeah.
but felt electricity. And at some point he felt nauseous, like he was going to be sick. So came back to the car, and as he comes back to the car, he's kind of like choking and coughing. Well, his wife sees from behind him, sees this figure come toward him. So she screams. So he runs in the car, grabs her, lays down in the back of the car, covers up to like try to protect her. Well, after a little while, he looks up and that he doesn't see the whatever this, he doesn't see it anymore. So they get back in their seats, try to start the car up. It starts, they drive away. So if you ask me, this story reads like some fantasy writer read about the Flatwoods Monster and then was like, ooh, I can take this and really juice that up and make it crazy. so I think that's what happened. I mean, I think that's what, I mean, personally, that's what I think the story. I don't think it's real. However, it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting. And the guy was never interviewed again. And another mark against him personally, and maybe this is a bias, but you know what Kathleen May and Freddie May have going for them is they saw this thing in the area where they live, where they have people that can vouch for them, people that know them. Where this guy, you know, he was a traveler, so as far as anybody knows, this guy wasn't ever here. You know, and then on top of that, even if he was, nobody can vouch for him. I mean, nobody knows who he is. So I think there's a little bit, you know, that in it too. And he also says that he drove into town, into Sutton, and stopped at an all-night diner. And I am almost positive there was not an all-night diner in Sutton.
Okay.
Like at that, like the closest thing would literally be, you know, my wife's grandma that I was telling you about. Her husband owned a diner, but I don't think it was all night. And I really don't even know if it'll been operational at the time. But like, so I don't even think that existed. So like, there's just so many holes in it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
any. However, the cool thing is, this was published in. Actually, let me grab something. Oh. Sorry for the dead air.
No worries, man.
So this was published in a magazine called Male Magazine, MALE, and it was published in July of 1955. I have had a saved search on eBay for probably 5 years for this magazine, and like 3 weeks ago, I got it.
Oh wow!
So this is
nice,
it,
man. That's in good condition.
Yeah, I didn't even know if it cost $50 too.
Ooh,
but
wow.
I don't know. I've never even seen the cover. So if anybody really has to have a rare piece of Flatwoods Monster merch, this is it.
That is cool, man.
The story is in here. I looked it up and found it and read it.
Wow.
But on the outside, you know, there's a cowboy smoking.
Yeah.
You know, so some of the
That's awesome.
Yeah. So some of the other stories include like Madams of the Old West. I Lay My Life on the Line. You know, it's an action. It's an action for young men.
That is cool, man.
You know what I mean? So is it a real story? Who knows? But it's cool. I mean, if nothing else, it's cool that it was publication.
Yeah.
So anyway,
man.
Now let me tell you the one thing that makes me think that this might be true. So there's a lady that I go to church with. She told me years ago, she was like, you know my brother, right? And I said, no. And she said, he saw the Flatwoods Monster. And I said, no, I know the people who saw the Flatwoods Monster. You know, none of them have your last name. Like, Like you're not relatives with those. So she started telling me about it, and I thought, oh, this is new. This is a new story. I've never heard it. So she gave me his phone number, and I called him, and I interviewed him, and I have that recorded, but I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to release it. He doesn't want it released. He said I'm allowed to tell his story, but I'm not allowed to tell his name.
Okay.
But he told me that whenever Frank, there's a paranormal investigator named Frank Fascino. He wrote what most people think of as like the book to read on the Flatwoods Monster. And the main reason for that is it's because it's like this thick. I mean, it's a thick book. It's very exhaustive. It's very exhaustive research that he did. The one thing personally that I'll say about it is, he tells a lot in the book that is factually true, but like in my mind anyway, I don't want to discourage him or anything like that or disparage him, but may or may not actually be connected with what happened with the Flatwoods Monster. But he really creates a compelling story that's really big and that touches a lot of things. So anyway, so this gentleman got his book when it first came out, like in the year 2000, and because he just wanted to read it because it had to do with where he's from. He had no other interest in that. Well, he's reading this book, and he gets to the illustration that Frank did that he dubbed as the Frametown Monster. He said, Andrew, I got to that illustration, looked at it, and like was overcome with terror. He said, I dropped the book on the ground. And he said it was because he saw that, and he said, I've seen that before.
Wow.
Like I've seen the thing in this illustration. I've seen it before. So he starts thinking about it. And then finally this memory comes to him that he has forgotten. And this is his memory that he remembered. And he said, as far as I know, I'm remembering it right. But he said, I don't know. It's like, I could be making it up and not realizing it. He said, but this is what I think happened. He said, and for it to happen in 1952, he said, I would have had to be 3 years old. He said, so take that for what it's worth. He said, it was one night. He said, I woke up and it was in the middle of the night, and I couldn't get right back to sleep. He said, and I got scared. So no, he wasn't scared yet. So let me retrace that. So he got up, and instead of like just going back to sleep, he got up out of bed, and like he noticed that like everybody else was asleep, everybody's doors were shut to all their rooms, and he goes over to his bedroom window and looks out, and he said he sees that monster going across their lawn. He said it looked just like the illustration. He said it looked like this lizard looking thing inside of this metal. It looks like a lizard person in like this metal skirt that's floating. Wow. He said he sees that. That he saw that in his yard. And he said he was so scared, and he wanted to go tell somebody. He said, but he thought in his little kid brain, he thought if I go wake anybody up, I'm going to get in trouble. So he didn't wake anybody up. So he went back to bed. He said, I can't remember how long it took me to go back to bed. He said, but I went back to bed. He said, but that's it. He said, but it was scary. Yeah. He said, so once he had that memory, he went to like his oldest sister. I think he's there was a big group of kids that he was a part of. And I think they're mostly sisters. It may have been all sisters, but him. But anyway, after he had this come to him, he was trying to figure out, like, was this real? Like, did this happen to me? So he went to visit his oldest sister and said, hey, I was reading this book, retells the story that I just told you. And he said, does any of this sound plausible? Am I crazy? And the sister said, that's really strange. At one point when you were really little, like for 3 weeks, you went on and on about seeing a monster out your window.
Wow.
But none of us thought anything of it. We just thought you were imagining things, and we didn't we didn't worry about it that much. And after so long, you just stopped talking about it. So
Wow.
evidently he, at least when he was little, told his family, I saw a monster outside my window. And then after a while he stopped talking about it. But it makes sense that he would have forgotten if he was 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know
Ah,
what it takes to regain a memory after that long, but so that's his story. And the reason why that makes George Natowski's story seem accurate is because that's what he described. And where this gentleman lived, he didn't live in Frametown, but that window that I told you about between Clay and Sutton, he lived in that window. So
wow.
he lived on the river. Um, so you
That's
never know.
very interesting. That's very interesting.
Now, I feel like that took a really long time, but
No, man,
so
that was a very compelling encounter. Like, that's really cool.
I'm glad you liked it, but I got 2 more stories that I have to tell you.
Cool, man.
so so the other one is a story that was described by Audra Harper. It was a lady that lived in the um, Heaters area of Braxton County, which is probably 10 miles north of Flatwoods. So again, close in proximity. Now her story takes place before September 12th. I don't know how far before. She didn't record it. She did record her story, but she didn't record dates and times, anything like that. And I only got to see where she actually typed it up after she had passed away. Like after she passed away, her family was going through all of her stuff. And that's when they found these old, basically like journal entries.
Wow.
Um, so she had written like 3 pages of stuff that, and I don't know when she would have typed them up, maybe sometime in the 70s or 80s, but it was like a handful of different stories that that happened to her that were weird. And but the one that's Flatwoods Monster related, she talked about her and her friend were so they lived where they lived was super rural, to the point where the roads, like in certain parts of the year, would get like impassable. Like they'd be too rutted and messed up. So her and her friend wanted to go to the store, and you could either go by the road and it take a lot longer, or cut like straight through the woods. So that's what they did. And while they were walking through the woods at one point on this day, they see like up ahead on a hillside, they see a fire, and they assume that it's one of their neighbors, like just set up camp or doing something. So they don't really think that much of the fire. But as they walk closer toward it, the fire turns into like a floating fireball. So at this point, they think, well, that's weird. That shouldn't happen. And then this fireball goes out, and in its place stands a 10-foot tall black figure. Now, the way she describes it, it seems very like ethereal. Like it doesn't seem like flesh and bone. It seems more spiritual. But who knows? But this lady was also a very spiritual person, so maybe that had something to do with it. But anyway,
Yeah.
so there's this figure, and her friend are scared, so they start running. Well, this thing starts chasing them, basically, and they're running as fast as they can, and this thing is like slowly catching up with them. There's still a decent amount of distance. Well, they get to this one fence in particular, go through this gate, open it, shut the gate behind them, and it's still catching up to them. So they keep running, but when they turn back, it never goes any farther than the fence. It stops at the fence. So they just run, get to where they're going, to this store. And right beside that store, there's a bar. So they go into the bar and start asking people in there, like, hey, will somebody drive us home? Like we're scared. We don't want to walk back through the woods. And nobody was like going that way or whatever. So then finally they were like, well, if we have to walk back, does somebody have a gun that we can borrow? So like they were going to walk back and just have a gun. Well, they didn't end up having to do that. Somebody ended up giving them a ride. And according to this lady's granddaughter, she never walked that shortcut again. She was afraid the same thing would happen to her. So
Wow.
so that, but the reason why it's related is because of proximity and roughly the time, and Audra herself later thought that it had something to do with the Flatwoods Monster.
Yeah.
But
and she never put this story out, because obviously this was found in a
yes,
private diary. Wow, man.
right. She would tell her family, like friends and family, but no, it never got out. It never got out at all.
Wow.
But she wrote, her granddaughter was the one that found it, and she brought it to me. I knew her. We worked in like the same area. We didn't work for the same people, but we saw each other a lot.
Yeah.
She brought that into me, and then finally, the last story that this lady told me is she came in here, and so I don't know if she still lives in the area. I don't think she does, but she was from this area. So this lady comes in and is walking around in here, and she's in here for maybe 15 minutes. Then finally she starts talking to me, and she was like, I was looking around in here and I really only see like one story of the Flatwoods Monster. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, I thought this was going to be like all the stories of the Flatwoods Monster. And I was like, well, there aren't really any more. And she was like, oh, I didn't realize that. She said, I saw the Flatwoods Monster. So then I was like, what? When? So she starts telling me this story. So she thought this was a thing. She hadn't really looked into it. She just thought the Flatwoods Monster was a thing people just saw around Flatwoods. And she didn't realize she was part of a very small group. So anyway, so the story she told me, I'm going to try to remember it. And like I said, this might be the first time it's ever been recorded. So I hope I get it right.
That's cool, man.
So that she said her boyfriend at the time, or maybe fiance, was working in the Flatwoods area. This would have been sometime in the 80s. He was up on a hilltop that had been cleared off. Like there wasn't any more woods. It was just a hilltop. She said, but it was, they grew hay on it. And she said what her boyfriend's job was to hoe it, or to scythe it, to cut it. Well, she didn't have anything to do that day. So she went up with him and was just sitting in his truck while he was cutting. And this is crazy. This is just the craziest story. So while he's cutting, she said, green smoke starts coming up out of the tall grass, to the point where her boyfriend gets scared and runs away, thinking that there's going to be there's a fire, and the whole field on this hilltop is going to be up in flames, and they might get caught in a fire. So he's like running away. Well, she said the green smoke starts to clear, and there's this tall green figure, about 10 feet tall, just standing standing there. So they see it and get scared and get in their car, drive back down the hill. I think he's clearing it for like maybe his uncle or something, like clearing his field. Well, they go to him and is like, we just saw something up on the field, this green thing that came out of this green smoke. And what this guy says to them is, oh, that was the Flatwoods Monster. Sometimes he shows up out there, and the best thing to do is just leave. It's like, I don't think he'll hurt you, but he shows up every so often, and we just leave.
Wow.
So that's her story. And again, this took place in the 80s. So for all I know, there is a legitimate Flatwoods Monster that is seen all the time
Yeah.
by people that do not talk about it.
Yeah,
So
man. Yeah,
I have no idea.
potentially there's a lot of people that have seen this that just don't,
Yeah,
because a lot of people don't
potentially.
talk about paranormal experiences and stuff. So,
Right.
wow,
Right. So, but again,
interesting.
like that's what this lady thought this was devoted to, was that thing that she saw. And she was like, it didn't really look, she was like, it looked kind of like she even went around and was like, this kind of looks like what I saw, but if you change this, this, and this, and then she would point at something else and say, like, that's stupid. Like that doesn't look anything like what I saw. Like having very strong opinions
Yeah,
about, to where like she was very sure of herself, of her memory.
yeah,
Um, and so that was fascinating.
that
But
is,
like I
man.
said, I don't even know her name. And she
Because
didn't
she
seem
just,
like she pulled my leg.
yeah, she just came in the museum one day and
Yep.
dropped a bomb.
Yeah. Haven't seen her since. This was probably maybe a year and a half ago when she came in, but
Wow.
haven't seen her since. The girl, there was a girl with her that I recall looked vaguely familiar, like I've seen her before. I didn't know her, but I'd seen her. So, and I don't recall ever seeing her again either.
Wow.
Who knows? It's weird. And I'll
It's
tell you another thing.
interesting, man.
When you run a place like this, um, it gets weird a lot, as you might imagine. I
Yeah.
mean, it attracts mostly people just like me and you know, relatively normal, but I say relatively, I'm not that, but but relatively normal,
Yeah.
interested. They think it's neat, they want to buy a t-shirt, they go home. But it does invite some like really hardcore into it people, and also like legitimately crazy people. I've dealt with some legitimately crazy people.
Yeah.
Um, luckily, it's not very much. Um, like there's one guy that comes in every so often, and the first time he came in, he told me that he had prehistoric evidence of Bigfoot, and he said he had it with him.
Interesting.
And I was like, "How is it prehistoric evidence of Bigfoot?" He said, "I find these rocks," or he said, "I've got this rock." He hadn't used plural yet, because how often do you find prehistoric rocks? But anyway, he said, "I've got this rock that was carved by Native Americans that show the likeness of Bigfoot." And he's like, "I got it in my pocket." And I was like, "Oh, well, I've got to see this." Well, he gets it out and shows it to me. It couldn't be any more of just a rock if it wanted to be. I mean, it was just a rock. It was a rock as if, like you ever go out on rural back roads that are just rock,
Yeah.
but like busted up last week at a quarry, rock, and then dumped on the road. That's what it was. It was a chunk of rock.
Yeah.
And boy, but he started showing it to me. He's like, see here, these are the eyes, these are the nose. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this guy, he was very intense. He believed every word he said. And I thank God that he was maybe like 5'2". Like, I'm glad he's little, and I'm glad he's little, because if any part of my showed like you are crazy,
Yeah.
I would be glad that he was like 5 foot tall and that I'm 6 foot tall,
You could take
because
him.
I could, if I had to, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I mean, but maybe I would have a shot. I would have a real
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so he leaves, and as you may or may not know, 2 blocks up the street from us is the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
wow, man.
literally two blocks up the street. So they got established a couple years ago, and it's really cool too. So anyway, so that guy leaves, and I'm thinking, this guy showed me prehistoric evidence of Bigfoot. his next stop is going to be them. So I call my contact over there and I'm like, hey, just so you know, I was talking to this guy. He was real squirrely. He was like maybe 5'2", and he said he had evidence of prehistoric Bigfoot. He was like, oh yeah, we know him. I was like, I said, so I assume you don't have any of his rocks on display. And they said, no, we don't.
Not
so
yet.
what blew my mind, so he told me that he said he finds these rocks all the time. And he said his house is full of them. Like maybe he either said hundreds of them or thousands of them.
Oh man.
So be picking up every rock, seeing Bigfoot and putting it on a shelf in his house. And I hope to God he is not a listener of yours.
If you are, get in touch with us. We want to know more.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't take it I said as an insult.
No. No, it's interesting stuff, man. I want to get out there for sure. I want to come to the museum. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to have.
That is something I'd love to do one day, man.
Maybe, you know what? Maybe sometime, if you have any interest, maybe you should have me back just to tell you about all the people I've had to interact with.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
That guy's one of a pretty good handful.
Yeah, for sure. We can do that.
Of wackos I've had to deal with.
I've got to ask you. I know, obviously, what do you think the Flatwood Monster is? I know if you had to put a label on it now, it's an alien. It's, where are you now? I know it's a tough question.
It's tough because like, I know Freddie, Freddie saw it. And he can't tell you he can describe it, but he can't tell you what it was. He doesn't know what it was. And he has his theories, but if he was, if he's being honest, I mean, he is, but if you're talking to him, he would say like, I don't know what it was. So in all honesty, I'm probably way too close to it and too mixed up in it, to even have my own theory. The only thing that I know is that those kids and those witnesses saw something in the woods that night that, at least as far as they're concerned, should have been there and scared them half to death. But so what it was exactly, it would only be a guess. And I kind of hesitate to say this, but this is genuinely the way that I feel, and people can be mad at me if they want to. But anybody who feels like they know exactly what the Flatwoods Monster was, or I would even go out on a limb and say what anything is or was, sure. Like with 100% certainty, like they are deluding themselves, because especially something like the Flatwoods Monster, it was seen, as far as I'm concerned, once over 70 years ago. And if even the people that saw it can't give you a real good idea as to what it was, nobody else can either. And something I like to tell people a lot too, like people will reach out to me every so often and want me to like come to an event and speak on the Flatwoods Monster. And sometimes I can, but in all honesty, most of the time I can't, because I get asked so often, and almost everything happens on a weekend. And, I've got a family that I like to see. So, I don't do a lot. I do a lot of stuff like this that's like remote. It's easy for me to do. But, in person's kind of difficult. But what folks will impress upon me is that, they want an expert. And what I always try to impress upon everybody is there is no experts. There are none.
Yeah.
Now, there are people who have taken the time to read a bunch of books, to read a bunch of accounts, to maybe visit locations, to do earnest research, and I applaud their efforts. You can only be an expert in, data and maybe just accumulating details. But there are no experts. Everything that I know, if you were diligent enough on the internet for an hour, you could know every single thing that I know, or listen to this podcast, and you know virtually everything that I know. So I always try to impress upon people, like, listen, if you need a speaker at your event, get up courage to talk in front of people and do 2 hours worth of research, and you are your expert. You're done. You don't have to hire anybody. You don't have to pay for somebody's hotel room and their lunch. You are, and I would say that goes for every single talking head on the History Channel. I don't care how nice their suit is. I don't care how weird their haircut is. They aren't experts.
Yeah.
Because they don't exist. So that's another one that's a personal pet peeve of mine, if you can't tell. But,
that's right. What you're saying though, with the paranormal, there is no experts. We've all got our own opinions and we've our own experiences, but there's no real experts. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah. So it's funny too. In a podcast of yours that I listened to, you talked about your own personal paranormal. Am I remembering this right, that you said that you thought that you saw somebody that looked like William Shakespeare?
Yep. When I was 10 years old.
That is so wild. But what's funny is, so for as much as I am a skeptic in general, I don't doubt your story, one bit. If that's what you experience and that's what you're willing to stand behind, I'm never going to call somebody a liar if they're willing to stand behind, something like that. But at the same time, I don't know. It's hard to tell, like, how much of what we think we see is really us, like, almost asleep.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Well, because I'll tell you, and something else that happened. Boy, we've gone on for a long time. Are you sure this podcast isn't too long?
No, this is cool. As long as you're okay to talk, they're cool.
Okay. So, when it comes to when it comes to the weird things, the thing that I'm most skeptical of is ghosts.
Okay.
And the reason why is, so this will really stray really far away from the Flatwoods Monster.
I was going to ask you if you've had any paranormal experiences.
Okay. Well, okay. So my answer is, I don't think I have, but my stepdaughter thinks I have because she was there.
Okay.
So I'll tell you that story. So the reason why I don't really believe, I'll go into like why I don't really believe in ghosts, is because, so I'm a Christian, and I have been for about 10 years. And the most real things that I've ever experienced that you could call, out of this world, is the very real interactions that I feel like I've had in the presence of God. So because of that has led me to, more or less, I believe, the Bible front to back. So, and I don't take pieces out of it or anything like that. So in my mind, unless someone can show me a part of the scripture that I've not seen, which is possible, I'm not a scholar. When you die, you go to heaven or hell. You don't stick around.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that scares me, though, is if people are seeing things that seem ghostly or spirit-like, what scares me and worries me is that maybe what they're actually coming in contact with are demons. Because to me,
it's possible. Yeah, man. Yeah.
To me, that's the only thing that makes sense. But again, that's coming completely from my faith and not from anything else. So the reason why it worries me is because if people are dealing with the paranormal and dealing with ghosts in particular, I worry what they may be inviting into their own lives. But this is what happened. So, and it was actually it was interesting. It was interesting. So we were doing this ghost hunt in this building in town, and there were maybe 15 people there. but they were all these, like, everybody's kind of grouping up into these little groups, and it's a 3-story building. It's pretty big. So people are like spread out. And there was this younger guy there, probably either in his teens or early 20s. I never met him before this night. Evidently there are these things, and you might be familiar with them. There are these things that have something to do with some gaming system that can, like, that while you're playing, there's some sort of camera or feature or something that you have pointed at yourself. So as you move, it tracks you.
Yeah.
Well, evidently people have taken these things and used them to try to find ghosts.
Yeah.
So, like, most of the time when they're pointing them around in a room or whatever, it makes these like amorphous blobs that don't look like anything. And then every so often you'll see a person, right? So you're shaking your head. That tells me you're very familiar with this. So
it's like a stick man sort of thing, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So this kid was standing in this doorway, and he had this contraption. He was walking around with it, with a tablet showing him this picture. So he's pointing it in this room, and it's at night, so it's fairly dark. And he said in the corner over there, there's a ghost sitting down. And I looked at the shape. I mean, yeah, it kind of looked like a stick man sitting down. Well, the whole time while I was there, I was kind of being a little bit of a troll. So I said, oh yeah, there's a ghost over there in that corner. And he said, I think there might be. And I said, what do you think would happen if I went over there and stood in that corner? And the guy said, I don't know. So I said, I'm going to. You tell me what happens. So he's standing there holding this, and my stepdaughter's right behind him. At the time, she's 18 now. She was probably 15 or 16 at the time. So she's standing back there and watching. They said that they could see me walk into that corner, stand there, and that as soon as I get to the corner, that shape, like, bounces, like, up into the ceiling and then back at me.
Wow.
And they said as soon as it bounced back at me, I had this reaction. Now, I wasn't watching him. Like, I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
But kind of felt like, not that I got shocked, but it was kind of like the feeling of like a 9-volt battery on your tongue, but over my whole body.
Wow.
And I yelled, I yelled a cuss word. I'm trying to remember what it was that I said. Is your is your podcast?
Yeah, you can swear, man. Yeah, that's cool.
I remember. As soon as that happened, like, I jumped and I yelled, "Fuck a duck!" And then bolted. I bolted out of that room.
Yeah.
At the same time, they see this happen, and they were like, "A ghost just touched you. A ghost just touched you."
Wow.
And I was like, nah. So, to this day, I'm still like, I don't know.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah. But I legitimately felt something enough that it scared me. And part of me thinks like, well, I just got into my own head, and got freaked out. But then another part of me says, well, then how come that corresponds with a thing that two people were watching?
Yeah, yeah. And if that jumped at you at the time that you felt the shock,
yeah,
that is, how can you explain that?
Yeah. So I can't really. And what's funny is it frustrates my stepdaughter Haley to no end, because she's like, you can't believe in ghosts. One shocked you, and I was like, but did it though? I mean, did it? Maybe I don't think it did. And she was like, I watched it. I watched it happen. And so that frustrates her to no end. But there's but I don't know. That's the funny thing. So the more I'm into this stuff, the more that I learn and the more that I experience. But it's weird to say, the less that I believe.
Okay.
Like I don't know. It's like I'm so torn.
Yeah.
That it makes, like, I don't really, so I don't know.
I think it's good to be skeptical, to sort of not always jump to the paranormal, which is something I do quite a lot. I've got to be honest. I'm always like, yeah, that bang, that was a ghost. You know, I am like that. I can't help it. But I know that you shouldn't be like that. You should say, no, it could be the wind, you know, it could be, you know, it could be
Yeah.
anything, you know, it doesn't always have to be paranormal. So I think that's
Yeah.
a good thing to be, you know, skeptical, open-minded, but skeptical.
Yeah. But it could be, you know, that maybe I did have a bad paranormal encounter, and maybe
Yeah,
my
man.
brain just shut that out. Just,
Yeah.
just, just pretend that never happened, and that you have a, you know, so
Yeah.
because because I almost don't trust myself, because there was one time when I could have. It took me months to finally come to the realization that I'm pretty sure I did not see a UFO. But like, I want to see a UFO. I look for UFOs all the time.
Yeah, man.
Driving, if the sky is nice and clear, you know, I'm outside, I'm looking for UFOs always. Well, so this one time I thought that I found a UFO. I thought that I saw a UFO. But then the more and more, like I said, it took me about a month, but I think I've come to the conclusion that I just saw a conventional aircraft that was far enough away that it became featureless, and that it was going in just the right direction, that I thought it was standing still. But I've watched enough to where now, but it didn't have a contrail after it. So
Was
what
this
now I try to
during
rely.
during the day as well?
This was like at 6 p.m. But the reason why I could see it is because the sun was hitting it, and it was real bright.
Yeah.
But I'm almost positive it was only because the sun was hitting it and it was reflecting. Because now I do a lot of, like I said, I look up at the sky a lot, and I'll see planes, and if they have like a contrail after them, all of a sudden they look more like they're moving. But I'll really pay attention and look, and I'll think, if that trail wasn't behind it, showing a trajectory, and not seeing anything else around it, what I think that plane was even moving. And I'll think, no, it from my perspective, it looks like it's not moving.
Yeah.
Or moving so little that I can't tell the difference. But it's like you need that trail to give it momentum and trajectory. And this thing that I saw did not have one. But you know, so it's kind of the opposite, where like I want to see a UFO so bad that I'm pretty sure I've made myself see one.
Yeah.
So you know, there's that too. So that comes back to, like, you asked me, like, what do I think the Flatwoods Monster is, or like, where do I stand on any of these things? I feel like we are so fallible that, boy, it'd be hard for me to place my bet on anything.
Yeah.
You know, if it came down to just going off of what somebody thought they saw, or what they thought they felt or thought they experienced. Because even like how I told you before, movements that I felt in my faith have been the most real things I've ever felt, that feel otherworldly.
Yeah.
But I still would not expect anybody to rest their faith on my experience, you know, because
Yeah.
it was my experience. So that's where my faith lies. And so as powerful as I feel like these moments that I've had in my life felt, I would never in a million years think they should be powerful to anybody but me.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of where I land on most of this stuff, is where even when I can't even take myself at face value, it's really hard to take anybody else at face value.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's hard because it's like anything, until you've seen something that you know concrete yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to put your faith in it. So I totally
Sure.
understand. But it's
So if you don't mind me asking,
yep.
this Shakespeare figure that you saw, and I know that mostly, you know, that in most podcasts where someone's interviewing somebody else, the interviewer probably doesn't want to talk about themselves
Yeah,
too much.
no, that's cool, man.
But I'm curious, what do you think it was?
Well, it wasn't Shakespeare, I don't think. I mean, it could have been, but
Could have been.
it just had that look, you know. Just he seemed to be from that era. whoever this guy was.
Right.
But it was a solid man. It wasn't see-through or anything like that. It was just as if a man was sitting there.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I don't think I was dreaming or anything like that is because the experience lasted so long for me. It wasn't like I woke up, it was there for a few seconds and it was gone. It
Right.
was there for quite a while. It was there for a while. I'd called my mum in the room because I was terrified. And I'm going, look, there's a man in the room. Like, obviously, I'm freaking out.
So mom was present. You could still see it.
Yeah, he didn't go anywhere. My mum went over to because I was in a bunk bed and it
Yeah.
was a desk sort of the other side of the room.
Yeah.
And my mum's gone over to the area and she's saying there's nothing there, there's nothing there. Now, when I was little, I was quite a bad sleeper. So I used to get up a lot and try and get into my mum and dad's room. So I think they just had enough of that and they just thought, I think my mum thought I was probably just trying to do that.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, you're staying in your bed. And that was it. And I was terrified. And I can't believe to this day that I stayed in the room.
Yeah.
I still say to my mum, like, you're out of order. But I just remember going under the covers, sweating and just being terrified. And I looked a few times, he's still there. It was a freaky, it stayed with me, obviously. And
Wow.
so I mean, I think for me, for me that was it. That ghosts are real.
Yeah.
After seeing that, and I see other things in that house as well. I saw a naked lady walk past.
Yeah. I remember hearing you talk about that.
Which was really weird as well. Like that was another solid. I only saw that sort of in the corner of my eye, but it was still
Yeah.
a solid figure.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, it's still, but I'm open to it. Could be, I don't know what it is. I don't know. But if you had to ask me now, I'd
Yeah.
say it was a ghost.
So now, whenever you say ghost, are you meaning like the ghost of a person that once lived on Earth? I mean, is that?
See, I don't know. Are you seeing just an energy that's still there? Or are you
Sure.
seeing, because when I saw this guy, he didn't move. Like he didn't blink. Like he just stayed as he was the whole time. So
Wow.
am I just seeing a moment in time? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. All I know is that it was solid, and it was there to me at that night, That's all I know. But
Do you draw or anything?
I found a picture that was quite similar to how it looked. I did post it on Instagram right at the start of doing this show.
I have to go find that.
Yeah, yes, right. It'll be right at the bottom of the Instagram. But
Okay.
that was the closest. I should try and draw it actually, to be honest. Yeah, you're right. I should try and because obviously that wasn't the desk that he was at and stuff. But
Sure.
yeah, it was just it was a terrifying moment, but it sort of kicked off my
Yeah.
my
So,
sort
hey,
of
since you brought up Instagram, would you care if I plug some things? I'm always
yeah,
really
of
bad.
course. Yeah, no, 100%.
I'll
Plug away,
forget
brother. Plug
to plug.
away.
So if people are interested in the Flatwoods Monster and the Flatwoods Monster Museum, follow us on Instagram at Flatwoods Monster, Twitter at Monster Museum, Facebook at Flatwoods Monster Museum, and on YouTube at Flatwoods Monster Museum. So it's pretty easy.
Awesome.
All those are almost all at Flatwoods Monster Museum. So please follow us on all that stuff. On YouTube, you and your audience might be interested in this on our YouTube channel. I have a short documentary that I started making before COVID and that I finished during COVID because I didn't have anything else to do. And it's a short documentary. It's 22 minutes long. It's about how I was telling you how I find the most interesting stuff, these little sort of side stories.
Yeah.
So this is the history. It's a short documentary that's like the history and the creation of the first novelty item made in the likeness of the Flatwoods Monster. It's the Flatwoods Monster lantern. So if you find our YouTube channel, you'll find it's called The Lantern. It's short.
Awesome.
There's even a couple commentaries on there. I recorded one. a friend of mine who did the narration for the short, he recorded one. I've been trying to get other people to record commentaries as well, so that I can add those and put them up. So you have an open invitation if you want to do one.
Yeah,
Feel
man, I'd
free.
love to. Yeah, for sure.
But there's some guys, some other podcasters I kept trying to get to do it because they're a bunch of goofballs, and I thought that they'd be funny to cut up. So are you familiar? Do you know the Moth Boys?
I'm not too sure. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll check them out though.
They're podcasters based out of West Virginia. Some of them still live in West Virginia, and some lived in New York State. But anyway,
Okay.
I'm trying to get them to record one, but they haven't gotten around to doing it yet. But anyhow,
I'll do one for you, man, for sure.
That'd be awesome. And
yeah, I'd love to.
If you do that and send it to me, I'll edit it up and put it on there, and have it links to your podcast and stuff.
Awesome, man.
And what else? Come visit us sometime. We're located in downtown Sutton in West Virginia.
I definitely am.
We're open 7 days a week. We're only closed on like major holidays. We try not to be closed very often. There is the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum just down the street, like I mentioned before. However, they're not open 7 days a week. So if somebody wants to come and visit and they want to hit them both, plan accordingly. They're usually open Wednesday to Saturday. So just a heads up there. But it's very worth checking out if you're in the area. Let's see. That's probably about it.
Awesome, man. I will share all your links. I'll put it on all my social media as well, and on the show description, so people can find you easily. Andrew, this has been absolutely awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Same for me. I really enjoyed being on. Thanks for asking me again.
It's been an honor having you on, sir. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
I'm just going to stop recording.
Okay.